ZBrush at its core is an artist's tool. With powerful features like Paint Stop, you can create your concepts and illustrations directly in the program. Using a wide range of drawing and painting tools like pencils, inks, oils, and markers. These concepts, as well as any additional reference or orthographic images, can be loaded into ZBrush's image planes and adjusted to suit your needs. You can also adjust the level of transparency that you wish to work with as you sculpt, making it easier to see your reference. There are many ways to begin a sculpt inside of ZBrush. Base mesh creation with Z-spheres allows you to treat the beginning stages in a traditional sculpting fashion, acting as a flexible armature to quickly block in the overall shapes of your design. This gives you, the artist, the freedom to move, rotate, scale, and adjust the core structure. In addition to Z-spheres, you also have sketch spheres. With a wide range of different Z-sketch brushes available, you can organically build up your forms of your design. No matter what your subject matter, these sketch spheres help you get closer to the overall form. Combining Z-spheres with the Z-sketch spheres, you can pose, adjust, and prototype the range of motion in your work by rigging your sketch spheres with a click of a button to your original Z-sphere armature. These different methods result in an ideal sculpting mesh. With Dynamesh, you can take your designs even further, exploring the shapes by pushing, pulling, stretching, and inflating your geometry with 3D sculpting brushes. Dynamesh will instantly retopologize your geometry, providing you with evenly distributed and sculptable topology. Using masking brushes, you can paint a mask on your geometry to help protect certain areas from being affected by your sculpting brushes. The transpose line, which is unique to ZBrush, is a quick way to move, rotate, and scale the unmasked areas of your mesh. Dynamesh gives the artist complete freedom with their designs, always providing the most efficient geometry instantly. Sculpting brushes like Clay Buildup, Inflate, and the Move brush make refining your work a natural and enjoyable experience. These brushes can be used to add and subtract from your geometry, as Dynamesh prevents the stretching of the topology, giving you the ability to freely sculpt. The resolution slider can feed more geometry into Dynamesh, allowing for more detail in the early stages of your design. When combined with brushes like Damien Standard and many others, you can easily define your details within the form, building up the form with the many brushes that come preloaded with ZBrush, all of which are fully customizable to virtually every degree. Repositioning and adjusting is easy with Dynamesh. You can also use primitive mesh insert brushes to cut away from your geometry, subtracting the volumes of your mesh without distorting any of the topology. Hiding parts of the mesh is easily done with the multiple selection brushes. These brushes work similarly to the masking brushes, but rather than protect parts of the sculpt, these brushes will temporarily hide areas of the model. This allows you to easily work in tight places or parts of the sculpt that are partially hidden and hard to reach. The new and powerful Z-Remesher takes any mesh and retopologizes the surface. The Remesh Guide Brush, along with Z-Remesher's many options, will give you all the tools you need to generate nearly perfect topology for organic deformations, while still holding the overall form and design. Z-Remesher also handles hard surface and mechanical shapes very well, maintaining the hard edges and analyzing the direction of the normals to provide you an ideal base mesh without sacrificing your sculpting needs. Polygroups are a unique feature to ZBrush. They provide the artist a way to organize different groups of polygons within the subtool. The polygroup menu has many options built into it in order to generate different types of polygroup selections. By simply painting a mask and using the polygroup menu options, you can give yourself a complete set of selections to control as you work on your sculpt, making it easy to hide areas of the mesh and isolate a specific zone. Mesh extractions are a way to create new subtools. From a generated mask, the extract feature will generate a new object with thickness and polygroups. These polygroups can be used to create additional edge loops and group loops. These geometry features allow for unique designs in your model and give you the ability to control every side of the design. Another unique way to create additional objects is with the topology brush. The topology brush is a powerful way to draw edges and vertices onto a visible surface. This geometry can be used to replace the geometry it sits on top of to form a new base mesh, or generate a new subtool complete with polygroups and depth. Insert meshes and insert multi-meshes can be used to place custom meshes on your visible subtools through the use of a brush. ZBrush comes complete with a wide range of multi-purpose insert multi-mesh brushes, and creating your own set of brushes with a click of a button can turn any former project into a library of reusable assets. Using the curve function, you can draw multiple instances of your mesh onto the surface, or create elements like straps, tubing, and wires. These hand-placed meshes can be split into separate subtools, allowing you to rename and reorganize your assets. ZBrush makes it easy to experiment with its huge library of 3D sculpting brushes, giving you the tools to work quickly in a production pipeline, while at the same time making it easy to create your own custom brushes with a wide range of settings. With subdivisions, you can create as much detail as you need. The freedom to sculpt between high and low geometry opens up the workflow to a huge range of options and features. And with the addition of HD geometry, you can go beyond even your highest subdivision levels. By changing your brush stroke type and alpha, you can hand-place details created directly from photos, or create your own custom alphas and modify them directly in ZBrush. The surface noise features also gives you the tools to generate dynamic surface details across your sculpt. Dynamesh is also a powerful way to create new hard surface objects for your projects. With the polish and clay polish options in Dynamesh, you can maintain hard surfaces as you sculpt organically. The new functionality of groups built into Dynamesh will help you maintain the separate objects within your subtool. This way you can hide and mask different parts easily, while still working within the same mesh, with the polish features maintaining those nice clean edges. Shadowbox is another unique way to build out additional meshes and subtools within your project. You can convert any subtool into a Shadowbox object. Transparency options in ZBrush help you see through any visible subtools, allowing you to paint masks on orthographic planes while still using your sculpt as reference. These masks intersect in 3D space, providing you with a new sculptable mesh in your subtool list. Combined with Dynamesh and clay polish, hard surface elements are rapidly generated without sacrificing any of your creativity. ZBrush has many time-saving features built in, keeping the artist's freedom and speed in mind, while at the same time allowing you to explore and combine different workflows together. Radial symmetry allows you to sculpt in many different places at the same time, creating designs that follow patterns, or using the different symmetry options to find patterns is made easy in ZBrush's transform options. Beyond selection, masking, and sculpting brushes, ZBrush also has many different kinds of clipping brushes. Clipping brushes can help you shape your sculpts in very accurate ways. In conjunction with Dynamesh and clay polish, you can create unique and interesting new designs with precision and speed. Building complex shapes can also be achieved using any one of ZBrush's many 3D primitive objects. Each primitive object comes complete with a unique initialize menu that helps you define every aspect of the mesh at a beginning level. Refining these ideas can be done with the many sculpting brushes provided in ZBrush, making sculpting on hard surface objects a painless experience, and allowing you to explore these ideas with a wide range of polish, pinching, creasing, and smoothing brushes. Transpose Master can then take your sculpt with many subtools and temporarily reduce it down to one tool, allowing you to pose your object together and breathe life into your sculpt. Combined with layers, you can continue working on your original sculpt between your pose and a symmetrical driven pipeline. These layers can be keyframed, like many things inside of ZBrush, into the animation timeline, allowing you to blend between poses across all of your subtools. Using high-resolution photos and textures in ZBrush can help enhance your polypainting experience, building up a level of realism to your sculpt by projecting through your sculpting brushes and onto your sculpt itself. You can pull color information as well as depth from your image sources, and you can even manipulate your images directly within Spotlight. Masking can be used to help with your polypainting, and ZBrush gives you many different options when it comes to dynamically generating new masks based on your model's surface. Creating custom materials will also help you fully realize your designs. ZBrush also provides you the tools necessary to work in a production environment. Features like UV Master make it quick to unwrap your subtools and transfer your polypaint into texture information, exporting valuable things like normal maps, displacement maps, and diffuse textures. Decimation Master and GoZ help you work between different software packages, making it easy to bounce back and forth and take advantage of all your tools. Creating additional details like hair, spikes, grass, and foliage can be done quickly with fiber mesh, using masks and polygroups to control where the fiber mesh is generated, selecting from a large library of presets inside ZBrush's Lightbox, and fine-tuning the final result with the many fiber mesh options. These can be saved and reused for later use, and eventually generated into your subtool list. Rendered with BPR will reveal the final results of your fiber mesh. Lighting can be done in many ways within ZBrush. Using light caps, you are presented with a 2D preview window to build your lights. A robust system of lighting options and specularity settings help you work creatively and see your results in real time. Rendering with the best preview render options will allow you to fine-tune every aspect of your render, from the shadows, to the wax modifier, to the ambient occlusion. Light caps can also be generated with HDR imagery, sampling the different values within the image. The panoramic shots can also be used with your render, making your project come to life as it sits within an entire scene. ZBrush's floor grids also help push the realism, with cast shadows and the many BPR filters allow you to fine-tune every aspect of the render in real time, without the need to re-render your shot. Each aspect of the render can be exported and used to further enhance your renders. ZBrush's mannequins are a unique way of exploring poses and compositions. Free posing and duplicating of the mannequin can quickly build an entire scene for you to explore, helping you tell a story. Presentation is everything, and ZBrush helps you show your work from every angle at its very best, rendering out time-lapse footage, undo history, and turntable movies. Many options are available to customize every part of your movie renders, including the ability to render every frame with BPR and BPR filters.
This is Joseph Drust, and welcome back to Z Classroom. In this video, we'll be covering how to use the BPR filters inside of ZBrush to create non-photorealistic, or NPR renders of a model. After rendering with BPR, these filters can be activated and modified in real time, allowing you to create different output styles. These styles can be as simple as applying an edge outline to more complex as rendering a model to look like a blueprint. So here are some of the examples of the images that we will be creating in this video. So here we have an example that is a pen example. So we have the model here, and then it looks like it's been traced in kind of this blue ballpoint pen, so generating this effect. Then we'll generate a sketch version, so a version that looks like it was drawn with pencil. So we have some different hatch lines happening in the shadowing areas, and then we have some of the imperfections along the edges where it looks like it was traced multiple times with a pencil. Then we'll create a halftone or dot version of the mesh, and coming through and making it look like it has halftone dots in the shadowed areas. Then we'll generate a line version, so a version that looks like it may have been printed on an old dot matrix printer, so having some different irregularities happening in the print. And then finally we'll be creating a blueprint version. So this is taking the model and completely changing the entire scene here. So generating it on this kind of grid lined surface and then having the model outlines being traced in white. So to start this, I'm just going to jump over into ZBrush here, and I just want to load in an example model, and this is a model that ships with ZBrush. So to access this, I first just want to go into Lightbox by clicking this button here or pressing comma on my keyboard. Once this is open, I want to make sure I'm in the project area here. Then I want to navigate to the demo projects and open this up. And then in here, I want to find the 4R7 Quick Heavy Load Mech, and then double click this, and this will now load that project in. So now with that project loaded in, I now want to change a few of the settings in my scene here. So I want to change the background color, maybe change the color of the grid, and then change the material that's applied to the mesh, and then do some other little quick fixes. So the first thing I want to do is I want to change the background color. So I'm going to navigate up here to the document palette and open this up. I'm going to locate the back color right here. And I'm just going to click and drag on this, and I'm going to drag it over here and kind of pick an off-white. So something like that. So giving the background this slight gray value to it. Next thing I want to do is I want to change the grid color here because it has a little color information in it. So I'm going to go to the draw palette, open this up. I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom here. I'm going to go to the modifiers. And in the modifiers here, there is an RGB frame and an RGB fill. And I'm just going to set both of these to 0. So this is going to take the color information out of that grid. And now I'm getting a nice gray tone to the grid there. After that, I want to change the material that's applied to the mesh. So currently there is this Ma Shiny Matte Cap applied. And I want to change the material to a flat shade material. So one that is using a standard material that will allow me to change the lighting information and have it reflect on the model. So I'm going to load one material that's in Lightbox. So I'm going to press comma on my keyboard to open Lightbox up. And then in here at the top, I'm going to navigate to the Material tab. And in this Material tab, there's this NPR shade material. And I'm just going to double click that to load that in. And then I'm going to press comma again to get out of Lightbox. And now I should have this appearing on my screen. So the mech here should now be displayed with this NPR shade material. And it's starting to get this toon shaded effect. Now once this material is applied, you'll also notice that the selected subtool on the model is brighter than the rest of the subtools. So I'm going to navigate over to the tool palette over here. I'm going to open up the subtool palette. And in here I'm going to come across one of these subtools and hover across the paintbrush icon. I'm going to hold down the shift key on my keyboard and then click the paintbrush icon, and that will turn on the poly painting or vertex coloring for every single subtool. And by default, the vertex coloring that's applied to this model is white. So now the model is displayed in this unified fashion. So every single subtool is filled with white, and I'm getting this consistent coloring across the mesh. Now at this stage, you may notice that some of the shadowing areas on the mesh here are still giving this kind of transitional gray value. So it's a blend of gray in certain areas. So I want to enable the flat preview shadows. So I'm going to go to the render palette up here and open this up. I'm going to navigate to the preview shadows area here, and I'm going to enable the flat shadow mode. And this will take the shadowing that's applied to the model, and instead of giving it a gradient value, it would actually render it as flat. And now with this active, you'll see now the model in real time here is looking something like this. Now I can rotate around my scene here and maybe want to adjust the lights as well. So I'm coming to the light palette up here. And in here, I'm just going to click on the sphere here to adjust that lighting. And I can just modify this to get it kind of in this high left corner here. So something like that. Now I have my scene set up and ready to be rendered with BPR. So to render with BPR, we just need to come up to this BPR button here, and we just need to click it. And when you click this, it's going to take your model, and it's going to render it with ZBrush's best preview render. So when I click this button here, it's going to process the mesh, and then I'll end up with result. So by default, after changing those settings and rendering with BPR, this is what I'm getting on screen. So my model is looking pretty good. You can see some of those gray values in the shadowing has come back, so it's not as flat as it was. But I'm getting this nice clean quality to the model. So the shadowing with this gradient fall off is very similar to the effect we were getting before we turned on the flat shadows. So in the BPR render settings, there is also an option we need to enable flat shadows with BPR. So I'm going to go back and forth with this render palette quite a bit. So I'm going to come up here and I'm just going to dock this to the side. So I'm going to come to the render tab here. And then I'm going to click this little icon right here. This is going to take this palette and it's going to throw it over here to the left-hand side. And in here you'll see now I have the render palette at the top, and I also have a brush palette, which is over here by default. I'm just going to click this icon here to close the brush palette. Now I'm just going to be left with the render palette. And in the render palette, in order to enable the flat shadowing for BPR, I just need to go to the render properties area here and open this up. And in here, there is a flat shadow option, and I can toggle this on. And now if I come up here and re-render with BPR, you'll see that my shadows are going to change, and now they're going to be displayed with this flat shading. So I no longer have that gradient ramp that was happening on my model. So now I'm getting a little bit better result here. Now at this stage, we've only taken the model, we've applied a flat shade material to it, and then we've rendered with BPR. And this is the result we're getting. So we can take this to the next level by now starting to add some filters on top of this render pass. And these filters are going to allow us to take the model information and modify it to get a different effect. Now the BPR filters live in the render palette. So if I come to the render palette here, I'm just going to close the render properties area, and then I'm going to go down to the BPR filters and open this up, and then I'm just going to scroll it up to the top here. And in here we have all the controls and buttons for the BPR filters. Now the BPR filters are applied after you do a BPR render. So you must make sure that you've rendered with BPR in order for any of the filters here to take effect. So if you don't have a BPR render and you come through here and try to activate a filter, you're not going to get a result on screen. So you can see with the BPR render here, if I come across F1 and click this little white circle here to activate it, you'll see I'm going to get a result. However, if I turn this off and now go back to my canvas here and just click to clear my BPR render, now if I go back to the BPR filters and activate that F1 filter again, you're not going to see anything happen. So when using the BPR filters, you must always first render with BPR, and then you'll be able to come through and use these filters to enhance the image. Now the BPR filters palette here is broken into different parts. So at the top here, we have the filters, and these are labeled filter 1 through filter 12, and these work in a stack. So filter 1 will be at the bottom, 2 will be above it, 3 will be next, 4, and then the top filter in the stack will be filter 12. So this structure is going to come into play because you can apply filters at a lower level and then have a filter above it affect that filter. So just think of it as a layer system where F12 will be the top layer and F1 will be the bottom. Now to activate a filter, you just need to come across it and click that white circle. And then with the filter activated, all these other options will highlight. Now at the top in this area here, we have the properties that control what the filter is doing. So for the noise filter here, we can change the blend mode of that. And then down here, we can change the properties of that. So if I increase this noise level here, it's going to give me more noise or less noise. Below this, we have the opacity. So this will allow us to let more or less of that effect come through. Then below this, we have some masking or clipping properties. So you can apply a filter, set the settings, and then now you can determine where you want this filter to go. So all these sliders down here and different options are going to control where this filter happens. So as an example, let's come up to the top of my filter tab here, and let's just change the filter from noise to something like paint. So I'm going to come to the filter here and click this. This is going to display all my filter types. And in here, I want to find the paint filter and just click that. And that's going to apply a paint overlay to the BPR render. Now in here I want to increase my threshold of my paint from 50 to 100, so that's making it solid. And then I'm going to change the paint color by clicking on this, and I'm just going to come down here and select a blue color. So now with this filter active, it's applying the paint filter, and it's using the blend mode of replace, so it's replacing what my BPR image is. It's at 100%, so it's filling the entire image here, and it has this blue color. Now with this, let's say I want to clip this out, and I only want this to affect the background. So I had my model there, and if I turn off the filter, you see it's still there. And now I only want it to affect the background. So I can come to this mask area here, and if I go to a negative value, this is going to affect the background. And if I go to a positive value, this is going to affect the model. So this area here will determine how the filter is going to function, and then this area here will determine where that filter is applied. So I'm clipping out the filter. So if I clip by this mask here, you can see it's only affecting the background. Then if I say only wanted to affect the shadow, I'm going to do the shadow option here and set that to 1. And now you can see that paint filter is only affecting the shadowed area. Now we can change the blend mode with this as well. So if I reset my shadow back to 0, now go to the blend mode option here. And let's say I set this to, say, multiply. You can see now I'm getting that color being applied as a multiply on top of the image there. And I can even change this to say something like lighten. And you're going to see I'm going to start getting different effects by just changing my blend mode and then updating the clipping down here with these sliders. So now let's go through and let's start modifying these filters to get that kind of effect we were showing initially, where we had this kind of drawing and then a pen outline going around it.
Lighting in ZBrush is designed to be fast and flexible, so that you can test out your ideas instantly and make changes in real time. The Lightcap interface gives you the power to develop and edit complex lighting quickly and see the results on your model instantly, whether you're in preview mode or when you're rendering using BPR or best quality rendering. In this video, we'll take a look at the Lightcap interface and the ways you can use it to develop sophisticated lighting quickly and intuitively. So here's a model that I've rendered using BPR. You can see it's casting shadows. When I start to rotate the model, I switch back to preview mode. And you can see as I rotate the model, the reflections on the surface, the lighting coming from various different directions, and all these lights have been created using Lightcap. So let's take a look at how Lightcap works. I'm switching to a basic material, and I'm going to put the lighting palette in the tray so that we can easily access its tools. And then I'm going to turn off the default light in the scene, so that the only lighting that we see is coming from Lightcap. Now I'm going to press the new light button, and this is going to create a new light in Lightcap. As I drag the red dot around in the Lightcap interface, you can see how I'm changing the position of the light, and you can see it also update on the model in real time. By increasing the aperture slider, I can create the look of diffuse lighting, just general lighting that goes over the entire model. Now as I increase the strength, you can see that the light is a bit brighter. It looks kind of like an ambient occlusion style rendering. I'm going to use this light to create kind of a fill lighting for my model, and then I'm going to add additional lights on top of it so that we can get sort of the sense of a multi-light scenario. So every time I press the new light button, it adds another light to the Lightcap interface, and each light can be positioned by dragging the red dot that appears on top of the preview sphere in Lightcap. Of course, I can adjust the fall off and the aperture and the strength of each light individually, and you can create some interesting effects. So I have an aperture of about 60 on this light, and I've lowered the fall off, and this creates kind of a hard edge to the light, which results in something that looks kind of graphic or hand drawn. It's kind of a very cool effect.
So I'm continuing to experiment by changing the color of the lights, adding additional lights, and changing their position to see if I can create some kind of interesting sort of environmental light. Maybe sort of a green or a bluish kind of bounce light that's coming from the environment. So I've added another light and positioned it so that it's shining from the upper left. And now I'm clicking on the alpha button and adding an alpha texture to the light to give it a little bit more visual interest. You can use your own imported alphas or anything that's available in the alpha palette. In this case, I'm just using a simple square. And when I increase the horizontal and vertical tiling sliders in the light cap interface, I can create something that looks like maybe a reflected window or some bounce cards or something like that, some kind of studio lighting kind of environment. And you can see it reflected in the surface of the model. If I switch to the specular mode in light cap, I can see how the lights are being reflected on the surface. If I switch back to diffuse and lower the opacity for the selected light with the alpha, then this light will only appear in specular reflections and it won't affect the diffuse quality of the light. So I'm just increasing the aperture and the strength now so it's a little bit brighter. And now you can see that the light is just reflected on the surface, but it's not doing anything to the diffuse quality of the light. I'll just reposition it here so it looks like it's being reflected from the upper left. I've continued to add lights to the light cap interface, and I'm using the light index slider to go through each different light and adjust their settings. You can adjust the shadow strength of each light individually. So I'm deciding which lights I want to have cast shadows and which lights I don't want to have any shadows at all. And now I'll create a quick BPR render just to see how the shadows are looking so far, and I can continue to tweak and refine to get something that looks very realistic. Because working with light cap is so easy, you can integrate it into your creative process while you develop the look for your model. So I'm testing different materials here with my light cap scenario and see how the lights react with different surfaces. There are a couple features of light cap that you can use to create a more integrated environment for your lighting setup. For instance, when I press the Create Environment button, it actually creates a background environment based on the lighting setup that I've created in light cap. So now you can see I have something that looks truly integrated into the environment. The term light cap refers to the way that lighting information can be captured from an image. I've gone into the texture folder of Lightbox and selected an image from the panoramas. In the light panel, I've selected this image for my background. Now I can rotate the image and zoom and find a good spot for my scene. When I turn on the reflect option and then press the light caps button, ZBrush creates a lighting setup based on the image, so now my model matches the background. When I switch to specular mode of light cap, you can see how the image is actually reflected on the surface. And if I rotate the panorama, after a few seconds, the reflections on the surface will actually update. And now I'll do a BPR render to see how it looks. And here's the result of the render, and you can see the shadows on the ground match the lighting. The surface looks like it's integrated into the scene. But now, of course, we can continue to use light cap to further develop the lighting in the scene and make it look even better. So I'm zooming in and I'm adding a couple lights in light cap and adjusting their settings, giving them a slightly blue color to sort of match the sky. And I've done another BPR here, and you can see how the image is starting to come together. I can use the Save button in the light cap menu to save my light cap so that I can use it for future sessions if I want to use the same kind of lighting on different models. So let's say I like this lighting setup, but I don't want to show the background. I can just turn the On button off in the background subpalette of Light Palette, and then just rotate my model till I get a nice view. I still have the same lights and the same reflections, so when I press the Create Environment button, it creates a background that matches the lighting that was sampled from the original image. So now I'm going to turn on ambient occlusion in the render options and do another BPR render. And here's the rendered image, but of course I'm not done yet because I can open up the BPR filters in the render palette and even after the rendering continue to adjust the look of my model until I have something that looks really spectacular. So here's an example of a completed render straight from ZBrush that shows the model integrated completely into the environment. Reflections, shadows, lighting is all accurate and it's all completely created in ZBrush.
In this video, you are going to be learning about the divide feature inside ZBrush that will allow you to subdivide your objects to higher polygons and allow for high resolution sculpting, also giving you the ability to walk between subdivisions to have better sculptural control with your lower and higher poly counts. To start off this demonstration, I'm going to load my Cube 3D, which is activated in my tool palette here. First, I would like to view the topology of this cube, so I'm going to enable this into polyframe mode by clicking this icon here or using the keyboard shortcut Shift F. If I wanted to begin sculpting on this cube, you can see by clicking on it, ZBrush is asking me to convert this primitive into a polymesh 3D. To do this, click the Make Polymesh button located here in the tool palette. So now that I have my cube enabled for sculpting, I'd like to go in and add some high resolution sculptural detail to this. First, I'll switch my brush to the clay buildups brush. Instantly, when I begin to sculpt, you can see that this low resolution vertex count doesn't allow for the high resolution sculpting that I'm looking to add. What I would like to do is add a subdivision level to this cube, which will divide each poly, giving me more vertex points to sculpt on. To add a subdivision level, first I'll demonstrate by clicking the keyboard shortcut Ctrl-D. You can see the cube has smoothed out along the edges and more vertex points have been added, which is allowing me for a bit more resolution to sculpt with. To access the divide button, located in the tool palette, scroll down to the geometry subpalette and you can see we have the divide button here. Slightly above the divide, we also have this slider which has a number 2, telling us we currently have 2 subdivision levels on our object. If I drag this slider down to the first level, our active points count located here at the top is telling me that I have 544 points. If I slide back to the second level, we have almost quadrupled that number at around 2,000 polys. Now that you have the ability to divide your mesh, it's important to know how much resolution or how many polys are needed to get the details we're looking to add. In the next portion of this video, I'm going to switch to a tool that already has subdivisions. By opening up Lightbox here, I can load in the Demo Head tool. So far we've learned
Hello, this is Joseph Drust. I am a senior character artist in the gaming industry, and this is a Pixelogic Z Classroom tutorial on GoZ and MentalRay for 3D Studio Max. For this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to set up your ZBrush file to quickly establish a renderable MentalRay scene inside of 3D Studio Max. So here we have my model. It is about 45 million polygons and contains 25 subtools. Now I've gone through and have poly painted this entire model. So if I come down and turn that on real quick, you can see that all the individual pieces are actually poly painted out through the magic of ZBrush. Now what I want to do with this model is I want to export out into 3D Studio Max and do some renders inside of MentalRay. Now normally this process would take quite a while with 25 subtools. Before the addition of the multi-map exporter and GoZ, you would have to generate all these maps individually and export them all out. Then export out all the geometry, and then import both the geometry and the maps inside of Max and relink them all in order to get your render established. Now with GoZ, you can now do a lot of this with just one single click of the button. So to start off, we have to get this model prepared for use inside of 3D Studio Max. There's no way we could bring in 45 million polygons inside of Max and expect it to render. It's just not that, just doesn't work that way. So first we're going to we need to set up UVs, low resolution meshes, and maps for each individual subtool on this model. So to do that, we're going to go to the glove here, and we're just going to start with that. So here we have a glove, It is 2.3 million polygons. It has 8 subdivisions. And if you scroll down here to the UV map, texture, displace, and normal, you'll notice that they're all blank. So this mesh has no UVs established on it, and all it has is geo and then the poly painting. And so we need to generate maps and UVs for this model in order to export it out into 3D Studio Max through GoZ. To do this, we're going to scroll down to the first subdivision of the model and see we have a polygon mesh that's about 145 points. Now this is a little bit low for bringing stuff in and then using it as a displacement mesh. It's going to give you a little bit of issues with the just how low polygon it is. So I'm actually going to take this mesh and go up to subdivision 2 and then delete lower. Now it's a good habit to do this across all your tools. This just gives you a little more resolution for when you go inside of Max, and it will help you help your displacement map project a little better. So after we do this, we need to get some UVs on this map. Now, right now it has none. So I could export this out into another tool and do it that way, or I could just use UV Master. Now, UV Master is up underneath the Z plugin menu at the top. I'm just going to take that and drop the toolbar over here so it doesn't vanish on me. I'm going to come down to the UV Master tab and open it up. From here, I'm going to turn on polygroups and symmetry, and I'm just going to hit unwrap. Now, in the amount of time that took, it has unwrapped the entire mesh for this hand. And so we can come down here and check the UVs now by going to the texture map tab and hit new from UV check. And we can see the hand is now fully unwrapped and ready to get textures projected on it. So we're going to turn that off, and we're going to turn the polyframe off. So now we have a low resolution mesh that can go up and down from 7 subdivisions now down to 1 instead of 8. And we still have texture and displacements are still blank. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to generate a displacement map. To do that, we're going to come down here and we're going to turn adaptive on and set the dsubpix to 2. Now there's many different procedures and processes of generating out displacement maps from ZBrush. This one we're just going to do simple 16-bit and then have it ready for GoZ. You can export out 32-bit, you can export out 32-bit 3-channel ones, and a whole bunch of other options you can just turn on and off through here. Depending on what your render can handle and what it wants, you can export out a variety of displacement maps. For this one, we're just going to go simple and just use the 16-bit adaptive. So now I'm just going to make sure I'm in the low res, and I'm going to click Create Displacement Map. And this will tell you it's processing up at the top of the screen. So now we have a displacement map generated right here. And you can see it's now actually being applied to the mesh. So we're going to turn texture off, and that will turn the displacement off as well. Now we need to get the texture map. So I'm going to go up to the highest resolution here, and I'm going to do new from polypaint. And so now we have updated our texture map with the poly painting that was on the surface of this model. If you turn texture on and off, you can see there's no change basically from the texture and the poly painted version of this model. You can slightly maybe see a little difference, but it's almost none. So now we have our diffuse map done, we have our displacement map done, and now we just need to generate our normal. So we need to go back down to the lowest subdivision and go down to the normal map tab. I'm going to turn tangent and adaptive on, and then hit Create Normal Map. And so now we have a normal map created, a displacement map created, and a texture map created. And also we have a low resolution mesh that has 574 points. So there we go. So now that subtool is ready to go to GoZ. Now to see what this does, we're going to go up here to the top, and underneath the tool palette we're going to go to GoZ. Now what this is going to do, it's going to take this hand, this glove, and export it into 3D Studio Max and attach the displacement map, the normal map, and the diffuse map to it. So I'm just going to click that button and then click continue on this dialog. And it's going through all the subtools and exporting. Now it should start up 3D Studio Max automatically and then import in your mesh right into the scene. So here we have our glove inside of 3D Studio Max. If I simply just hit render right now, it's going to render the object with mental ray right off the start. So there's our glove inside of Max with a displacement map modifier applied to it. Now, if I open up the material browser and we select the icon and I click the model, you can see that it actually has a shell material applied to it. So underneath the original material we have a DirectX 9 shader being applied, and this is actually linking the diffuse map and the normal map. If we go to the baked material, you see it's just a standard material, and if we go to maps, you'll see it has the diffuse, the bump, and underneath the mental ray connection we have a displacement map linked up. Now one cool thing GoZ does is that it actually, underneath the displacement map, it configures the minimum height and the maximum height values for you. So this takes out a lot of the guesswork that you'd have to set with the RGB offset inside the displacement maps in order to get a normal render to render and look right. So now that we have this mesh in here, you can see there might end up getting some displacement errors or seams depending on your displacement map settings. This one, if I click render, let me actually get it closer. I'll hit the render button. Looks like we're getting some slight things over the fingertips here. One way to kind of alleviate that issue is to just come up and put a turbo smooth modifier on it. So we're going to do that, and then we're going to put it up to 2. And so now we're going to hit render again. This will take a little bit longer this time because I upped the geometry on it. And so that looks pretty decent. It's very fast. I mean, there's tons of mental ray settings and different material settings you can come in and play with. This just gives you a huge start on getting any of your maps in. With all these maps already being linked, you can come in and actually take these maps and apply them out and link them up quickly to another material if needed. Now, these maps are all stored inside your users folder if you're using Windows 7. So this is users, public, pixelogic, GoZ project / default. And so if you export out any of these maps through GoZ, they're going to dump them into here. So this is just a quick way to come in and find maps if you need to link them up as well. Now that we have one object in here, we need to import the rest, because right now this is only a glove, but we have an entire model with 25 subtools. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this one, and then just reset my material slots here. And we're going to go back to ZBrush. Inside ZBrush we still have our glove visible. So now I'm going to go up to, say, the body. And as you can see, I've already gone through all these subtools and created a displacement, a normal, and a texture map, and had them assigned to all these slots. So I've gone through already and established the same thing we did with the glove, but just for the rest of the subtools. GoZ has the ability to allow us to export all these out at once and import them all in. So this is, instead of us going one by one through the thing and exporting out each geo and doing all the maps, GoZ is going to take a lot of that work out. The first thing I want to do here is go down and hit this all low button underneath the subtool pad. And this is just going to take all our subtools down to the lowest subdivision on all of them. This will just help with the switching and the speed on the export for GoZ. Now I'm going to make sure that only the tools I want have the visible icon next to them. I have some other files, subtools in here, like a supremely high resolution cloth pattern and a default cloth that I had on the top of my subtool list. So I make sure those do not have the visible icon on. Now that I have all the ones selected with the visibility, and each one of these subtools has a maps applied to it in their slots, I'm going to come up here and click this visible button at the top here. I'm just going to click that and then hit continue again. What this is going to do is just going to be like what it did for the glove, except for all the subtools that are visible in my Z tool. And it's going to do the same thing where it's going to link them all together with their normal map, their displacement map, and the diffuse texture, and import them all in automatically into 3D Studio Max. Now it should start importing all these different pieces. Over here you can see it says name and color, kind of which subtool it's on, and that's that. Now it's done. So it really took no time. Now if you look at our model now, we have our entire model into 3ds Max with all the normal maps applied in the viewport. If you go to material thing again, you can now pick any different pieces of the subtool, and you'll see they all have the shell materials on them with the same kind of setup as before, with the maps and the displacement plugged in with the displacement values already set. So now we've just taken our entire 25 subtool mesh and threw it right into Max with one click of a button. You hit the render window again, and you'll see that it'll render the entire scene with displacement maps. Why this is doing this, other things you might want to think about doing is just like we did for the glove, put turbo smooths on the actual objects, because you can see some areas down here on the piece of armor right here, you're starting to get a little bit edge creasing. And this is, again, between the displacement map and the actual tessellation of the geometry. So here's our rendered version, right from ZBrush right into 3D Studio Max, rendering in Metal Ray with a click of the button. Now from here, there's tons of stuff you can do with Metal Ray. The first thing I'm just going to do is put a turbo smooth on this. So I just selected everything and went over to the modify area and put turbo smooth. I'm just going to put turbo smooth of 1 across the board. So now with the turbo smooth applied, you can now see that some of the those harsh edges are now gone. So that's pretty much it for GoZ and 3D Studio Max with Metal Ray. Hope this helped, and happy ZBrushing. Thanks.
Hello, and welcome to another Z Classroom video. In this video, I want to cover how we can use ZBrush renders with other external application renders, taking all these renders and bring them into Photoshop so we can create a final image. So the benefit to this is we're going to be using our universal camera found within ZBrush to match up with the cameras and other applications. So we're going to be able to export the ZBrush cameras and import them into another external application. In this video, I'm going to just quickly show ZBrush renders with Keyshot renders and with our render from Maya, and just show how we can match all those up to get a final image. So within ZBrush, we're going to be able to just render here in the render menu. We're going to make sure, I'm going to put on in our render properties, I'm just going to make sure we have our shadows turned on. Okay, because I just want to have some shadows in their scene. And then up here in the top right, you have BPR, which is our render found within ZBrush. You can see the shortcut is Shift R. So I'm just going to quickly do a render inside of ZBrush so you can see what we're going to get with just right now what we're set up. So of course, I don't have everything assigned to this environment, but the ship is colored. So what I want to do is I want to use ZBrush to render out the ship, and then I'm going to render out the environments in the other external applications. So you can see this is just the render we're getting inside of ZBrush with everything on and rendering out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell ZBrush, let's turn off these folders of the environment and let's only render this ship. So again, now if I go and click this BPR render, ZBrush is now going to be rendering out what we have, and in our render menu, in render passes, you'll see that there's a shaded view of our ship, there's a depth, okay, and then there's mask. And you can see there's shadows that we can get as well. So this is, in essence, render passes that allows us to take these in to another application. So all I have to do is, if I like this render of the ship, I just click on the shaded, and then our menu will pop open, and then I can save this as a PSD file, JPEG, PNG, bitmap, or a TIFF. Okay, so I'm going to save us time, and instead of sitting here rendering everything out, I'm going to show all the final renders that I brought out of ZBrush inside of Photoshop. Because now what I want to do is I want to do now the opposite of rendering out the ship. I want to turn all the environment back on, and I want to send that to KeyShot. Now, in the draw palette, we currently have our perspective mode turned on, along with our universal camera. And this is allowing us to select any millimeter focal length that we want. So I just rendered that out in 50 millimeter. I've also stored this view through here. So you can see I can say render 1, render 2, and then top render. Right? So I'm rendering now the top render. And I want to send this now to KeyShot. So all I have to do is make sure I'm sitting on that top render, because that's the render view I sent. Make sure I have my perspective and my universal camera turned on, as I did when I rendered inside of ZBrush. In the render palette, we're going to now open up external renderer, and I'm going to turn on KeyShot. Now all I have to do is press this BPR button, and ZBrush is going to send everything you see here, along with the ZBrush camera, over to KeyShot. So let's go ahead and do that.
Dwayne, what's up, bro?
I'm going to press this button now. I'm going to send everything
Dwayne?
over to KeyShot.
What up, Boss Shark? What's going on, man?
Okay, here we are in KeyShot. So you can see I have my environment here.
What's going on?
I have
What's going on?
right now a free camera. I have a ZBrush camera that I can select, and as I select anything here within KeyShot, you can see it'll re-render. So I have my ZBrush camera. You can see I have 50 millimeter, which I had inside of ZBrush, and now I can assign any material I want from KeyShot onto my scene, and you can see I can click and drag various types of materials where I maybe want to change up this environment. So this is going to allow me to use KeyShot to render out different type of environments, and I'm using ZBrush to render out the ship. So now let's take a look if I wanted to get all this information now into Maya. So let's head back to ZBrush first, and then we'll head over to Maya. Okay, now that we're back in ZBrush, I want to now take these models and the camera that we have selected, and I want to export that as an FBX. So I'm just going to go to our Z plugin, and you can see there's an FBX export import. I'm going to say I only want the visible subtools, so that's obviously any one of these that have the eyeballs turned on. So these are all folders. So if I was to open my folder, you can see there's various subtools within each folder. And right now I have them all turned on. So I want those visibility to come. And if you look at my options, I also want to export the camera. Okay, so now all I need to do is click export, and we're going to get an FBX that I can import to Maya. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to click the export button, and then we're going to import that into Maya. Okay, here we are in Maya, and you can see my scene has been rendered out with an AO inside of Maya. So all I did is went to File, and then I imported an FBX. And then now we have another render from another application. So now currently I've rendered out things in KeyShot, I've rendered out the AO in Maya, and then I have various renders done in ZBrush. So now let's head to Photoshop and take all these renders and composite them together. Okay, here we are in Photoshop, and you can see that I have a ship render. It's very different than the environment because the hangar over here, all these renders here were done inside a keyshot. So if I just start turning off, you can see I have different types of renders coming from keyshot. There's just the ZBrush render if I wanted that as well. And then I just have different types of renders here for the hangar. Then of course the ship itself, right, will have different renders here. So you can see there are a lot of different renders. So if I go up this, you can see I can just play with this and see what render do I actually want to combine with the keyshot renders. So of course I can continue this process and keep trying experimenting things and seeing what render I'm really liking with maybe something that I've rendered out inside a keyshot. Okay, and then of course I have two different types of shadows. I have the soft shadows from ZBrush, and there's even flat shadows. So I can turn these layers on and off, and this is the benefit of rendering out different render passes and even with different applications and bringing them all into Photoshop. And then you can see here my Maya ambient occlusion. By turning it on and off, you can see what that does with the scene. And you can see everything is lining up for me because of the capability to send that universal camera to keyshot or export that camera through an FBX along with all the models and import that into another external application. And this is a great way to be able to create a final image that was done with multiple applications. Thank you for watching this Z Classroom video. Please continue to watch more here, and happy ZBrush.